Hey everyone, welcome to this week's release of the Hashrate Happy Hour podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, the Texas Blockchain Council, a Bitcoin-first, nonprofit industry organization working to make Texas the jurisdiction of choice for Bitcoin mining and blockchain innovation. They will be hosting North America's premier policy conference for Bitcoin and the digital asset ecosystem on November 15th through the 17th in Fort Worth, Texas. For more information, please visit their website at texasblockchaincouncil.org. On today's show, my guest is Matt Lousteau. Matt is the business development manager at Luxor. They are a software company focused on the Bitcoin mining space. They are building a full-stack suite of Bitcoin mining software and financial services products where they are offering everything from a Bitcoin mining pool to an ASIC trading desk to their brand new third-party ASIC firmware. Truth be told, this is a complete change of pace for the Hashrate Happy Hour podcast, where normally I'm focused on the energy component to the Bitcoin mining industry and how those two worlds are colliding. But on today's show, Matt and I go down the Bitcoin mining software rabbit hole. We talk about Matt's overlapping experience in the oil and gas industry and how that led him to the Bitcoin mining industry, the full suite of products that Luxor offers to its customers, and how their customers are utilizing that software for things like curtailment. We also talk about how their new firmware, LuxOS, is revolutionizing the way that miners will be able to manage their fleets, and how this can be leveraged as a better way to manage OpEx budgets. Finally, we wrap up the conversation with what in the world are Ordinals and why miners should be excited about them. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation discussing the software side of Bitcoin mining and how Bitcoin miners can better leverage these tools. So with that, I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation with Matt Lousteau. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the introduction, I'm here with Matt Lousteau at Luxor. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey Ben, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, very excited to have you on. Very excited to dive into our conversation today. A little bit of a unique conversation for my show, where we're going to really do a nice deep dive into the software side of things and go through, how Luxor plays in that environment. So excited to have this conversation in particular. But before we get into it, I have to ask, how was Empower? You guys were down in Houston at Empower. I'd love to hear how that went and how it was for you guys.
10 out of 10 recommend for the net promoter score people out there. A definite promoter here. It was a ton of fun. The guys at Digital Wildcatters are just excellent at understanding the industry, understanding how to throw a proper event. I'm a little bit exhausted still. We hosted a crawfish boil. The wife was kind enough to allow me to host a bunch of industry partners and my boss and boss's boss and all kinds of people. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of people over. Boiled 91 pounds of crawfish.
Oh my gosh.
Probably about 25 people. We had about, hey, listeners won't see, we probably had maybe a pound of tail meat left over. So it was a lot of fun. We got to introduce some people to a new cuisine. It was awesome. Great event.
Sweet. God, I had so much FOMO. I couldn't make it down this year. I wanted so badly to be down there. So I got to see, and I also have to ask, saw that you guys held, is it the first or maybe one of the first live ASIC raffles?
That's what we're saying.
Auctions?
Yeah, that's what we're saying. At least I don't know that it's verifiable, but yeah, the first in person live ASIC auction. Yeah, we we auctioned off one S19 XP, five S19 J Pros, five S9s, and one M30S plus plus, I believe. I don't remember all the what's miners quite as well. But yeah, my colleague Colin Kelly, he got all dressed up, cowboy hat, bolo tie, full kind of like Johnny Cash, all black and everything. And he had a mallet, but it was the most underwhelming part of the event. It didn't squeak. That would probably make up for the fact that it was just plastic, but it didn't squeak. But it also was very quiet when he hit the table with it. So it was a great time. And then all of the proceeds actually, so the I believe it was the profits. So I think we covered our cost there, but all the profits went to Satoshi Action Fund and the Texas Blockchain Council, basically to advocate for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining in the space.
That's sweet. Do you remember what the highest one sold for?
So we did groups, so you wouldn't be able to compare them side to side. So like we did a group of 2J pros, 3J pros. I don't remember what our highest dollars per terahash was, but I think the XP naturally fetched the highest. But it was a lot of fun. It was really fun to watch.
Oh, that's so cool. Next time you guys have to open that up online, I would have loved to have jumped in on it virtually. That would have been pretty cool.
That would be cool, and it's also an awesome opportunity to plug our RFQ, request for quote, so you can actually join an online marketplace for ASIC trading. So you can do it any day you
Yeah,
want.
and I'm excited to dig into that. You guys, Luxor has a whole suite of products and offerings for your customers. Quickly before we get to that, I'd love, Matt, to just dive into your background actually, and have you kind of walk us through what's your background and how did you go from where you were to Bitcoin mining and Luxor?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'll go way back for a second. I've always been a fan of technology. My dad was a technophile in some capacity, and my mom was a computer teacher. So like, I grew up like formatting hard drives because my mom would get donations from the local chemical plant or whatever in Louisiana. She'd get donations from their old used computers for her students. So I'd help her like format the hard drives and get Windows installed and everything so she could use them in her classroom. So like, I've always been a technophile in that capacity. Um, I went through the majority of my childhood and went to LSU for mechanical engineering. So I graduated from LSU in mechanical engineering in 2012. From there, I went to work for FMC Technologies, an upstream oil and gas company, now Technip FMC after a merger. So there, I was working on subsea oil and gas equipment. So that's anything from like pipelines to flow lines going between pieces of equipment in the subsea architecture, to well control equipment. And then one of the things that kind of started to scratch the itch of technology was some of the control systems. So they have really advanced control systems to be able to control uh, literally well bores subsea, tens of thousands of feet, or not tens, but about 10,000 feet subsea. They can control a slew of valves on the it's called a Christmas tree, the valve that sits on top of the wellbore. Um, they can control all of that. So like the control system, the communication system, they literally have like TCP/IP communicating down there that way. It's really fascinating. They're using fiber optics in some applications. That started to scratch the itch. Yeah, it's awesome. So like that started to scratch the itch for technology. Um, I wandered my way into pipeline after a brief stint of unemployment during the downturn of 2016. Um, so I started working for a pipeline company in it was technically in a field engineering application, but like I ended up doing more like continuous improvement and like applications of technology. So like I had to build a database for our field ticketing system. I was just kind of first man up, like, okay, I guess I'll do this. I had some
Sure.
affinity for it, but they had stuck me into that, and so I got to kind of extend my technological interest into a more professional environment, which gave me some underlying fundamentals, I guess you could say, to be able to understand some of the stuff around there in the Bitcoin space. And then early in 2021, obviously we're in the middle of a global panorama, if you will, and so that's my favorite euphemism for it, by the way. Um, just to make sure we
It
stay.
definitely makes you think twice about what you just called it. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, avoid demonetization or whatever that's going on these days with the Al Gore's rhythm. Um, so yeah, I started paying attention to some of the stuff going on there with like the, hey, here's another round of stimulus checks. I'm like, where's this money going to come from? And that kind of started me off down the road of like, maybe I need to wrap my head around monetary policy and macroeconomics and stuff like that. Looking at like the chart of like the Weimar versus the U.S. dollar, or whatever the what it was, the lira, franc. I don't remember what the currency was, but when the Weimar Republic was starting to fail, it's like, oh, that looks really familiar. It looks almost like a Bitcoin price chart. So that kind of started me off down that road, and then like somehow there was an intersection of my background of subsea oil and gas and like technology where Microsoft had a press release for like these subsea data centers they had just tested, and they were seeing like 40% extension on like the life cycle for their data centers because one, it was super cool, not super cooled in the technical sense of super cooled fluids, but like it was very well cooled because the ocean floor is pretty much on average at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It was also the electronics were in an oxygen deficient environment, which reduces the likelihood of oxidation, which is one of the leading causes of equipment failure in long term applications of electronics. So I was like, huh, that's interesting. And then I started to think, I wonder about like this Bitcoin thing. Could you like mine Bitcoin underwater? I haven't patented it yet, but give me some time.
Yeah.
So that started me off down the rabbit hole. I went down the altcoin route for a little bit and traded for a little bit, and then I realized that like I'm not that good at it, and like I don't like grinding my teeth at night because it's super stressful, like to go to bed with an open trade or whatever. So like I just started looking more deeply at the idea of monetary technology and what it means to have a sound money, and really kind of found myself settled down in the role of maxi, Bitcoin maxi, relatively late in 21, but like I would say all of 22 and to present, I haven't been shaken from that thesis that Bitcoin is really the only thing in the space that's of substance, of real meaning and value long term. It's our best chance at a peaceful revolution, if you will.
Yeah. We talked about it right before we hit record on the show. I'm kind of this funny Bitcoin maxi, but I'm very open to like all of the other, stuff that's out there in the crypto environment. But then the only thing that I'm involved in is Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. So yeah, I understand that. I didn't touch the crypto stuff in my journey into Bitcoin. It's too high octane for me.
Good for you.
There's no way I could go to sleep, with open trades or, I mean, I, stuff's just 24/7. I mean, it never turns off.
Yeah.
So it is a little too much for me.
Yep. Likewise.
Yeah. So going from oil and gas to pipeline, and then you had kind of this revolutionary moment or visionary moment where data centers underwater, Bitcoin mining underwater. What now is your role at Luxor, and how did the transition go from oil and gas into Luxor?
Sure. So like at some point through all of this, I realized I really want to work in this space professionally. So like as I made the transition to Bitcoin Maxi, it's like, okay, I have enough transferable skills that if I network properly, I can find myself in a role. So like for most of 2022, I was like tacitly looking and thinking about different things. And so like the first thing I did, I just started going to the Houston Bitcoin meetup. So like if ever you're in town on the last Thursday of the month, I have to shout out Parker Lewis from Unchained Capital, and I'm not going to dox him, but Al's Lacrosse, he's one of the coordinators. They throw probably the best Bitcoin meetup as far as like consistency in the group there. Fantastic meetup. If you're in Houston, the last Thursday of the month, make sure you get there. So I just started going to that very consistently, meeting as many people. Just made a personal objective. I'm gonna meet at least one new person every month. Um, Kept doing that, and I met a few people, specifically Mario Gutierrez, another guy in the space with Exa Digital and Vibe Energy. Um, he said, "Hey, yeah, good to meet you. You're in oil and gas." He's a former geophysicist, by the way, or he's still a geophysicist, but he used to work in oil and gas directly. He said, "Yeah, I'll keep you in mind." And then, like, lo and behold, a couple weeks later, he's like, "Hey, there's this position open up at Luxor, business development for their firmware. Would you be interested?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I'd be very interested." So he made the introduction, and no joke, they're on it. Luxor, the leadership there, the whole team is just very agile in everything they do. Um, I had an offer within a month of the first interview. I think. I mean, not even the first interview. Offer of the within first month of the introduction. So like they moved quickly. They were ready, and so yeah, firmware was like a nice merger between like I had to have some technical skills, which I've already kind of explained the background there, but also I don't have to be so technical that I'm like writing the code that's going into the firmware. Now I had to write some code for some of the testing and stuff like that, like just in Python or whatever, to make sure that the firmware is behaving properly. But yeah, I understand it well enough to interface with potential clients, and then also with our engineering team to make sure that they understand the client needs.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. And yeah, it sounds like you have this perfect mix of like technical enough, but you're not so technical that you don't know how to talk to people. And I mean that in the best of ways for the people that are out there writing code, and don't take that personally, but you know what I mean? It's this nice blend of you understand the technicals on it, but you can go out there and hunt down new business for the company with the software. It's great.
I'm a people person.
Yeah,
Office
there you
space,
go.
yeah.
Yep. Yep. So I do also just have to ask with the oil and gas, experience. So I had a conversation for the show with Steve Barber,
Oh, excellent. Yeah,
and
love
for
Steve.
for the listeners who follow Steve on Twitter, he's very oil and gas pro and pro coal, and I mean he's very vocal about all those things. And our episode we go into a lot of it. Were you hearing about Bitcoin mining as like an additional value to oil and gas, or like an additional revenue stream for these oil and gas operators when you were with them?
So the pipeline space is relatively removed from the producer and operators. Like, don't get me wrong, like our clients were the same people who are running the wells. However, those industries are that industry is relatively well siloed. Um, the production team is different from the construction team, is different from the operations team, is different from the maintenance team. And not that they don't talk at all, it's just that when you're in that zone, when you're in that space, it's relatively narrow focus. um, but that was actually one of the early things that kind of made sense to me, was like when someone said, oh, they're using flare gas to mine Bitcoin. I'm like, oh, duh. It's like within seconds, like, that makes sense, cheap energy, right?
Sure. Sure. Okay. Just had to ask
No, it's
it.
fair.
Just was curious if you were hearing about that piece as a potential revenue stream for the companies you were with.
That is one of the things at the meetup, like the Houston meetup. They have people from. Are you familiar with EOG? It's Enron Oil and Gas. Like it was an early spinoff from Enron. They're not actually
Okay.
related to the original corporate accounting negligence or whatever. Not even negligence, just fraud. Uh,
Yeah.
but EOG, I mean, like there's a guy who worked there who came and spoke at the meetup. There's all kinds of people in this space. So like, I was more aware of it from the Bitcoin side than from my personal industry side. But it was definitely loud, and it is absolutely a way to monetize stranded gas. Whether it's because you're flaring it because you don't have infrastructure to produce it, or your infrastructure isn't built out yet, it is absolutely a very very early industry, burgeoning to say the least. Like it's gonna boom.
We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor. Support for this episode comes from Sunnyside Digital. Are you ready for the next Bitcoin bull run? Get ahead of the game by building out your Bitcoin mining infrastructure now. Sunnyside Digital is your one-stop shop for everything Bitcoin mining, from transformers and switchgear to racks and miners. With a white glove approach to understanding your needs, they'll provide you with the hardware you need at the most competitive pricing possible. Say goodbye to your sourcing headaches and say hello to Sunnyside Digital. Contact their sales team today at sunnysideinc.ca or via email at sales@sunnysideinc.ca. All right, now back to the show. Yeah, it's cool to hear the innovation. It's also what I find fascinating is, I have these conversations and then I hear things like how technologically advanced the oil drilling actually was, and some of that work you were doing with the technology behind it. It's all super fascinating to me, and hoping to keep learning more. I candidly I don't know a whole lot about the oil and gas industry, but learning as much as I can. Um, so Matt, maybe to switch gears here back to Luxor, you guys are known for your software, and well, you're known for many things, and a couple of those are your software, your pool. You guys are one of the more well-known ASIC trading desks in the marketplace as well. You guys do, co- you know, co- consultation as well for people that want to get operations up and running. I'd love to hear if you could maybe give me and the audience a walk through who is Luxor, what do you offer, and then from there we can start to kind of dive into some of those.
Yeah, for sure. So Luxor is a mining services provider. There are, like you mentioned, multiple facets to the services we provide. Uh, kind of at the core, one of the earliest things I think we offered was the mining pool. Um, I'll go through the list and then we'll kind of loop back. So we've
Yeah,
got
yeah.
the mining pool, we have brokerage, and then our RFQ, which is kind of like the client-facing technical version of our brokerage, ASIC trading desk, like you mentioned. We have derivatives, so we have hash rate derivatives, and then we have this will be released after our go live, so I can say firmware. We'll be releasing firmware. That's actually why I came onto the team. And then we also have a new publicly available service of Ordinals. It's kind of an interesting technical thing we can jump into at some point, but it's really ordinal inscriptions if you want to get super technical about it. Um, so I guess from the top we've got pool. So like if we're talking more to like power companies and people who are less familiar with the mining space, um, the mining pool is a way for all the different miners in the space to collect their compute power, contribute it to a group of other miners, and then share in the rewards. Because the way Bitcoin works is there's a block every 10 minutes. That's the target time, and so with that block, there's a new set of Bitcoin introduced, and that's called the Coinbase, and that's 6.25 Bitcoin at present. And there's also transaction fees for anyone trying to transact in Bitcoin. So if you were to wait to win a block because of how many miners and how many machines there are on the market, you would have it's worse odds than getting struck by lightning by far. You would have very little likelihood of actually getting any Bitcoin for your compute power. So what miners do is they pool their resources together, and they're able to collect uh, Bitcoin based on the amount of hash power or compute power they contribute to the pool. So it's a proportional payout. There's different structures in the payout structures and stuff like that. But to go shortly, ours is a FPPS pool, so full pay per share, meaning we average the transaction fees that have gone over the last 144 blocks or past day. Um, we also pay out the block reward, the Coinbase 6.25 at present. So that's going to get cut in half in a couple of years, and we'll use this as kind of a callback for the less aware early Bitcoiners maybe. In about a year and a half or so, we're looking at what's called the halving. The block reward, that 6.25, will get reduced overnight in an instant to 3.125 when we have the halving. So we have the pool. It allows people to get paid for their compute resources without having the risk of potentially not mining a Bitcoin for a year, 2 years, or whatever. So that's pool. We've been doing that for as long as I'm aware. I'm pretty sure that was our first offering to the public. Um, Another thing that we've added within the past couple of years is the brokerage. So one of the things that most miners will tell you when they first get into the space and they want to buy equipment, it is ridiculously intimidating and super sketchy. Like all of the ASICs are manufactured, ASICs being the mining machines, those computers are manufactured in China. Um, there's not a lot of ways to get it otherwise. And so what we provide in the space is a trusted third party because we are publicly available. We're not publicly traded, but we have a big enough presence to where if we were trying anything sketchy, like we would take a very big social hit and it wouldn't work out for us. So we provide a trusted third party to anyone in the States who wants to buy. And then on the other side, anyone in China who wants to sell. There's risk for both of those parties, so we help to mitigate some of that counterparty risk. And one of the things that we recently rolled out is called RFQ. It's an online platform that is a marketplace for buyers and sellers. You can log in, post a request to, I forget all the terminology. We could have, I'll shout out Colin Kelly or Lauren Lynn, our brokerage team, to clear some of this up. But basically, you can post a want to buy or a want to sell, And so it's anonymous to where, like, if you're a large publicly traded company, you're not forfeiting like a competitive advantage by,
Yeah.
hey, this is how much I want to sell or how much I want to buy. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So
so
it's a little bit like more trusted, easier to use Telegram group. So right now, if I mean, so if you don't want to go and procure it from China and you're not able to buy like big 200, 300, minor orders, you can go into Telegram and it's like the wild, wild west in there.
yep,
It's yeah, that
absolutely.
sounds like that's kind of, you guys are the better version of that, the more polished version.
Absolutely. And so, like, you post your want to buy, how much you want to spend, how many machines you want, what model you want, and then our vendors are notified immediately. Hey, there's someone who wants to buy. They can come in and bid. You can set the time frame. Hey, I want a response within 3 days, 2 days, 7 days. I forget all the time frames, but up to 7 days, I believe. So yeah, you can get a response really quickly, and it helps to just kind of, like I said, formalize the process. And with RFQ and how we operate is we are the trusted third party. So we take payment from you, the buyer, and we take delivery of the machines, and we coordinate delivery from the seller. So um, both parties are facing Luxor, and obviously we collect a fee for coordinating that. And so yeah,
Yeah.
it's I wouldn't say it's revolutionary, because I mean, obviously trading desks exist, but in this space, it's a definite step in the right direction as far as looking a little more
Yeah.
professional.
Yeah, you guys and Foundry is the other one. You guys definitely are kind of the standout, doing it right and really doing a good professional job in the space. So yeah, I appreciate that walkthrough because the RFQ feature and platform that you guys have is phenomenal.
Yep. So the next one I mentioned is derivatives. This is the one I'm probably least educated on, but I can talk briefly on it. So basically, prior to October, when we released this product, you could hedge your power price with a contract, right? You could get a long term contract and hedge against market volatility. Um, you could hedge against the price of Bitcoin with CME futures, right? You could go purchase futures contract from Chicago Mercantile Exchange, right? Like, you could go do that in a very formal way. But what you couldn't hedge was actually the compute power that you had online. So, like, if you had Bitcoin on your balance sheet, that risk you could mitigate. If you had a power demand coming, you could hedge against that. But if you've got a mine that's up and running, your power price is as good as it's going to get. You only have some Bitcoin on your balance sheet. You still have this operational risk of hash rate that you're generating that may or may not be generating more or less Bitcoin. So what we introduced is a non-deliverable forward contract, which allows a miner, or we even have some speculation. There's different requirements on, like, capital allocation to be able to speculate versus as a miner. But what you can do is you can hedge with a contract that says, for the next month, I'm going to purchase this much hash rate worth of hash power for a given price. So right now we're ripping, right? Bitcoin's ripping. I don't know. Last I checked, it was like
Yep.
26. Did we get to
Yeah.
26?
Yeah. We're
Okay.
we're recording on 314 and Bitcoin just hit 26. We're all very excited.
Yeah, it's a pleasant change of pace. Well, if you think this is just a scam pump, now we're in the middle of the month, so it doesn't necessarily work out. But because we do our auctions at the end of the month, um, if you're convinced that, okay, we're at 24, 25, 26, or whatever, it's going down, you can hedge your hash rate, because you have operations where you have computational work being done. You can hedge that hash rate with a contract with us, and you get fixed income for that duration. So it allows you to de-risk your operation. It could be very useful for, like, a hosting provider where they have a certain amount of uptime required, and they have to provide that revenue to their clients. Well, you can de-risk with hash rate. So we offer the contracts in US dollar denominated contracts or in Bitcoin denominated contracts. So, like, for the hoster, the Bitcoin denominated might make sense because most of their payouts are going to be in Bitcoin anyway.
I'm yeah, I'm actually really interested in the derivatives product. Understanding that this won't be quite the area of expertise, but maybe just to double click on it super quickly.
Okay.
For that product, is that you guys then that are running the actual miners to provide that hash rate?
No.
Or do you have partners, and you tell me if we can go down this, but do you have partners that are providing that hash rate for you?
So we can we can double click on this part because I know this part very
Great.
easily. Uh, I remember I mentioned non-deliverable forward. Non-deliverable means specifically there's no exchange of hash rate required. It's a contract based on hash price. So it's basically like in one position it's a short on hash rate, and the other position you don't actually have to hold the underlying asset to speculate on the asset.
Interesting. So what you're saying, and this is, more elementary questions from me, but just to kind of break that down, you guys don't physically have the hash rate. So this is just, yeah. I'm even stumbling to ask the question other than to say, you guys just, there aren't a machine somewhere producing this hash rate that you guys can sell. And I ask that because I've heard, like, there are some groups out there that are offering, there's a group down in Dallas offering split share. There's another group out there that's done like an NFT. I think it was done through an NFT. Like, there's a couple of different products, but they're actually secured by physical hash rate. So I was just curious if that was how this was functioning, but it sounds like no.
Correct. That is not how this is functioning. There's no exchange of hash rate. It's a CFTC regulated contract, so everything's above board. It's not like this is like a whoa, that's kind of weird. Like this is non-deliverable forward contracts are commonplace in the market of commodities, and that's probably one of the key words that I missed in the description here. Is like hash rate is a commodity. We've effectively established such by getting it regulated by the CFTC. So commodities you can have a deliverable contract, obviously, where like you can hedge your oil price and take delivery of barrels of oil, or you could do a non-deliverable contract where you're not actually exchanging any physical commodities.
That's so interesting.
It is. It's fascinating.
That's crazy. Very cool. Appreciate you spending a little bit of time on that. So, what I am excited to talk about is your firmware. And
Yeah.
so I know that but I'd love to dive into this more, hear more about this. And it would be cool because it should be timed right around when you guys are launching. So,
Yeah, we'll be public ideally tomorrow, if everything goes according to plan. So by the time this airs, I'm hoping we're basking in hash rate that's coming in from Luxor firmware. LuxOS is I think what we're branding it as. Um, it's an exciting product in that it's the first U.S. based, built, designed, delivered U.S. based aftermarket firmware for Antminer ASICs. Um, I joined the team in December because my role is business development, and we didn't really have much business to develop until we had a product to deliver. So, my first week with the company, they were delivering S9s, S19J Pros, XPs. So, like, I literally have an S19J Pro running in my garage right now. I'm getting hosed on the power price because I am residential, even though it's here in Texas. But it's definitely worth it because I get to stack those Sats non KYC, and then um, it's also kind of essential for my job because I need to understand the firmware to be able to test it, play with it, mess around with it, verify that I understand how it works. Where when a client comes to me and says, "Hey, we want it to do this," or "Hey, it's doing this," I don't know what's going on. I have some awareness and ability to kind of consult and get that up and running, or see if we can't maybe customize a solution to implement it to suit their needs. So yeah, so like, what do you know about firmware at this point? Like,
great question. What I don't want to do is sit here and compare it to probably some of the competitive products. So, what I understand with the firmware is it's something that you can flash or just download to the miner, and then you can go in and fan speed, you can control that. You can control the hash rate and the watt output. And is that similar to what you're thinking? Is
More or
that
less, yeah. I think the
okay?
best context for this is the stock firmware. So the stock firmware is built by Bitmain, and um, Bitmain makes probably the best chips in the market, the best miners in the market, and there's a reason for the success they've had. What Bitmain doesn't quite provide is controllability, right? So if we can reach for some analogies here, some metaphors, in that the firmware that Bitmain ships on their machines is like a switch. It's pretty much literally a switch. You can be on or you can be off. They've recently released some firmware that allows for underclocking, which provides a little bit better efficiency. But you can have your machine on or you can have it off. What the aftermarket firmware provides is it provides control over all of the components in the system. So you mentioned fans, hash rate, um, and you mentioned power, but ultimately, what power consumption is a result of fans and your hash rate. So
Okay,
um, we go from a switch that's on or off to maybe like a rheostat or what's it called?
like a smart thermostat.
Yeah, but the point is, you have a dial that you can go full speed, low speed, you can go high speed. Like you get a lot more control over the machine in a way that stock firmware hasn't provided yet. And so, if we call back to the earlier topic of the halving, where the Bitcoin block reward gets cut in half from 6.25 to 3.125, if you think about that very fundamentally, that's literally revenue, right? Like when you mine Bitcoin, you don't actually mine US dollars, you mine Bitcoin. And so unless the exchange rate for Bitcoin to US dollars doubles overnight, your revenue is going to probably get cut in half, right? So um, historically, that's meant some troubling times for miners. There was a really good episode. I can't remember the podcast, but I know Pierre Richard was talking about this around sometime in 2020, I believe. But basically, how challenging the economics of mining really got after the halving, because operators had their revenue literally cut in half. Um, and what that means for an operator is you have to be the lowest cost provider of hash rate. Otherwise, you're going to get crushed, because that's how markets work. Like, that's the beauty of Bitcoin. It's a free and open market. If you don't produce Bitcoin in a way that you can cover your OpEx and pay your notes on your machines, like, you're going to get crushed. Like, it's just basic business at that point. So what firmware allows you to do is to optimize your performance in a way that, let's say it's really tough times around the halving, and you're right on the edge. You can dial back your hash rate, because with dialing back your hash rate, you're also dialing back your power consumption. So as you dial back your power consumption, you can get slightly better margins. So if you can squeak through those couple of months just after the halving to make sure that you stay operational, you don't have to lay people off or whatever. And traditionally, what we've seen in the Bitcoin markets is that a few months after the halving, the price starts to skyrocket. And that's because of the scarcity of Bitcoin. It's like what people really don't necessarily wrap their heads around is Bitcoin is ridiculously scarce. Now, there's rumors that some of the reasons that Bitcoin didn't go higher that it did in this past, not 22, but 21, was because of all the paper Bitcoin that was being sold by FTX and some of that stuff. So, like, they were just being total frauds. They didn't have any Bitcoin, but they were selling it like it was. So it was suppressing the price. Now, if regulators kind of crack down on that kind of stuff this year, like, you might see some different performance in the markets, and you might see the price of Bitcoin really start to rip. But either way, you have to get through that initial onslaught of your revenue is literally cut in
That's
half.
right.
So you have all the tools at your hands by using firmware as opposed to the stock firmware.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's will your firmware, I'd love for you to touch on, some of the dynamic like features of it. So are you guys going to have things like auto tuning or anything like that as part of the features that is in the
Absolutely. So auto tuning refers to a very specific operation where you adjust. There's two parameters to a minor chip, the ASIC chip specifically, the integrated circuit chip. It's voltage and frequency. So the way that the S19 series for Bitmain works, you can't adjust the voltage except by the entire machine. So you set the voltage for all three hash boards, and that's fixed. You can change it, like you can adjust the voltage for all three, but once you set it, it's set for all three. What you can adjust is the frequency, and you can technically adjust it chip by chip. And there are operators out there, there are firmware providers out there who do that. And our firmware will allow you to, if you so choose. However, our auto tuner will not use that mechanism because I'm not going to get into the circuits of it. But basically, if you do it not quite right, you'd end up with an imbalance in the current going through the chips, potentially shorten the lifespan of the machine. So our auto tuning is going to be board by board. So you've got three boards in every miner. We're going to optimize those that way rather than trying to do it at the chip level. One of the neat things about our firmware is the API. Our API, the documentation is stellar. It's written clearly, it's written in a way that anyone could pick it up. If they know how to use a REST API, they can figure out how to develop their own implementation of any of this stuff. So, like in principle, you could actually auto tune remotely if you wanted to, but we will ship with an auto tuner in the coming months, I believe. We're testing it internally, and that's the other side of it is we're testing it very rigorously because if you ship an auto tuner that is not properly tested, you're fluctuating the operating parameters. You could damage machines, so we want to be really thorough about that before we ship it.
That's so cool. And you touched on one of the things that I'm pretty curious about, which is, having that remote accessibility. Um, a lot of the things in some of the conversations I've had with the power companies, curtailment is like it's a very big feature in these power contracts that these miners are dealing with, and for the power companies, it's a key function on their grid is to be able to drop these loads so that they can then provide that electricity to other customers. Um, does this then allow for, okay, we just got a call from XYZ power company, we've got to power down, we got to go from 100 megawatts to 3? Can they do that with this firmware?
Yes, 100 to 3 is probably not the kind of scope that we're seeing in most cases. That would be like maybe,
It's a big example,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, that would be maybe like Winter Storm Uri kind of stuff. But yes, that's
Yeah.
actually exactly the kind of thing we're looking at. And you get some really fascinating use cases, potentially like if you have a behind the meter mining operation where someone's generating power, they may want to sell it back to the grid, especially in Texas where it's deregulated grid. Um, the way our firmware works is like, if you remember, I said before it was on and off, just a light switch.
Yep.
Well, now you can actually dial it. So, like, let's say
You can dim the lights.
you're still profitable on your mining
Yeah.
operation, but you could actually bump your revenue stream if you actually sell some power back to the grid. So you can go maybe to 75% of your hash rate across the entire fleet. Whereas what you used to have to do is turn off 25% of your miners. And you might have to select the best miners. You can actually send that command to the entire fleet all at once, and it dials them back as you're mining, and then you potentially have power that you can sell back to the grid. Or if you're in a so like that's for like the voluntary demand response. They also have like controllable load demand response where you're contractually obliged to respond to their commands. Where we may actually be receiving commands, if not by the power provider, but by a third party who operates in the middle.
And yeah, that feature was kind of where I was going to go next and ask you about next was, there it's not uncommon for the power company to have the on off switch to these operations, more or less. And so to be able to give them a very dynamic dial to bring this load down to, exactly what they need, that's pretty unique because it starts to create more of a win-win. It's already a win-win scenario for everyone because the power rates are structured in a way that this is advantageous for miners to use, but you can make it even more of a win-win because you can start to say, okay, we only need this much. They can dial it down to that, and that may allow for the miner to keep some of the hash rate online. So that's very cool.
Absolutely.
Um, because I have conversations with these power companies, and some of them are pretty, vocal and public about looking at vertically integrating operations. Is Luxor, are you hearing interest from power companies that might be exploring some of these options?
I haven't had conversations specifically with power companies at this point. Um, there are third party providers who operate between, like they're between the miner and the power company. Um, can't get into any specifics as to who we're working with there, but there's definitely an opportunity that's growing quickly. And then, I mean, I can imagine a world where power companies they could put this on site, right? Like, hey, put this right next to the generator, and generator go up, mining go up, or hey, demand goes up, mining go down. Like, it could be really easy to start to incorporate that into some of their process controls. But yeah, I haven't been speaking directly with power companies to your original question.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. I see it being such a good fit for these power providers that are looking to integrate this. I'm very excited to see the firmware. I'm very excited for that launch and that release. I think the last piece that you touched on in the suite of offerings is Ordinals, and I will just start by saying this is like I'm wading into territory that I have very close to no idea, but I'd love to dive into it a little bit more because I think it does touch on some of the functionality of how the Bitcoin mining actually works and functions. So what are ordinals? You guys, I think you were the first to incorporate an ordinal into a block. So maybe go there. Let's go there.
So I'll start with that last part. So we weren't the first. Like, the first ordinals were back. I don't know exactly when, but they go back a little while. There's a great episode of Citadel Dispatch with Matt Odell and Casey Rodemar. Casey is the founder of the Ordinals project and the Ord wallet, I believe. Um, I would recommend anyone who's curious about Ordinals go back and check that out. What Luxor did was they have mined the largest block to date, so just south of 4 MB, which is technically the limit. And so we can get into some of that, yeah. And we also launched Ordinal Hub. It's basically I would probably describe it as like OpenSea for anyone who's familiar. OpenSea, but for Ordinals, whereas OpenSea is like the Ethereum version of that. And so, to get back into all of this, what are ordinals or ordinal inscriptions? Um, if anyone's familiar with the idea of like an NFT, the idea is that you're trying to establish like ownership of a digital asset in a way that's provable and traceable, such that, like, hey, I own this JPEG. It's kind of funny to say it that way, but that's kind of the fascinating part of what ordinals is and what inscriptions are that's different from NFTs. Like, NFTs, you have a contract or a transaction that says you own a JPEG that's at location X, and location X could be any website that could get censored. It could get taken down. It's an Amazon web server. Like, that could go away very easily. One of the key differences with ordinals and inscriptions is that, like, the code, the text file, or not text file, but the string of text that actually represents your JPEG is encoded into the blockchain. So, like, the address that holds it and the data are directly tied together in a single transaction. So one of the reasons it's controversial is because it starts to blur the lines of like Bitcoin's use case and people's innovation. Some of the really hardcore Bitcoin maxis that have spoken out against it are basically saying like it's a perversion of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is it's got this one use case that is to fix the money. It is a proper scarce asset that is perfectly transactable. It's immutable. Like, all the fantastic properties that are Bitcoin those are all there to make it the best money that's possible. And I'll give kudos to Peter McCormick, because he phrased it in a way that I think is a fair and objective way to assess it. Like, if Bitcoin is supposed to be money, do ordinals make it better money, worse money, or is it neutral? And I think the jury's out on that, but because of the uncertainty that comes with it, there's absolutely a piece of risk, a bit of risk that comes with it, because you've now introduced the possibility that it actually makes it worse money, because it may be what am I trying to say? Censorable, right? It make it less censorship resistant, because there may be more people trying to censor it, and that's ultimately all it takes to censor something, is kind of consensus that it shouldn't be said or whatever. So, technically speaking, what are ordinals? There is a way, the Ord wallet, and then like the Ordinals protocol is a way to track every Satoshi that was ever mined and will ever be mined. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, which means 2.1 quadrillion, I think is the number, 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis. Well, if you keep track of every transaction that ever occurred on the Bitcoin blockchain, you can actually index every Satoshi with a basic convention to where you know what address holds what Satoshis. It's a painstaking way to keep track of all the Satoshis, but in doing so, you now know when they move. So what you can establish is ownership of individual Satoshis. So now you've got like a physical dollar you can look at. That's the ordinal part of it. The other part of it is inscriptions. Well, now you've got a physical dollar that's got a serial number that you can track wherever it goes. Inscription is basically like just drawing a piece of art on the dollar, right? And it's more robust than that, because you can do all kinds of different file types, because any piece of data can be represented as a giant text string. So you put this text string into this transaction. Now you've got an ordinal that's traceable and a transaction that encodes this data. You can put a JPEG in the blockchain. So you can have an image of an ape, whatever, like all the stuff that I think it's super wacky, and I would never pay a large amount of money for it. But I mean, it's a free and open market, so there's this constant like kind of tension.
So there are other things that you can put into this then. Yeah. So instead, like, you don't have to do a Bored Ape. That's just
no. So someone's encoded
all the buzz Doom.
Like the video game Doom.
Oh,
yeah, they've actually put that into an ordinal now. It's like you can do JPEGs, video game file, like just the code for a video game. You can put 3D printer files, like the STL file that you need to send to a 3D printer. You can put that there, and that brings up some of the censorship resistant conversation, because like if someone puts the file for a 3D printed gun in the blockchain, like there's actually a lot of states and countries even that regulate the crap out of that kind of information. Now, like if you're a free speech absolutist, like you're probably not a big fan of censoring that, but like if you now own a node that has that data on it, like you might open yourself up to being censored by a more restrictive type of government or governing body. So like it's controversial to say the least. And one of the other things it does is like it increases the amount of data that's being stored in the blockchain.
And that's what I think I heard the most about, was just the sheer size and volume of the data needed for these things. It pushes everything out of the block, doesn't it?
It can. I mean, here's the thing, like the trend. So what's ultimately going to govern what it pushes out is the fee market, right? I mentioned earlier, you've got the Coinbase, that's the original 6.25. But if you want to post any transaction to Bitcoin, you have to associate a fee with that transaction. If you put the minimum fee rate, which is 1 sat per V byte, it's like intentionally a variable rate, but like the lowest fee, you may not get your transaction into a block for days. But it's an open market to where if you put an ordinal in there and you want it to be the biggest one, put a whole Bitcoin fee on it, and someone's probably going to mine that into a block.
Someone's going to do it.
They would actually be a negligent pool if they didn't, right? Like people would be looking at like, hey, why didn't you didn't mine that because of just the principle?
Yeah, is there is there risk then to slow down actual transactions, or maybe this is just not me having a full understanding of like the transact, because I know that there's lightning and that the transactions are taking place on lightning as well, and so that could, potentially be the layer or the application for those. But yeah, there's just a lot more I have to dig into on ordinals, that's for sure. It's
Yeah, and
fascinating.
from a mining perspective, the important part is like what it also does is by creating more competition in the fee market, it increases fees. So miners get more money out of like there were people saying, "Oh, I dropped Luxor as a pool because they did this." It's like I don't think you understand what you just like
Yeah.
by kind of forging the way here. Like I understand why and that it's controversial, and I'm okay with that. Like hey, it's technology. There's going to be controversy at some point. I also think it's too early to say that it's absolutely bad. And if I or we or the market comes to the conclusion that ordinals are absolutely bad, like I'll reconsider at that point. But until then, I'm in a wait and see kind of moment because ultimately, if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, like, do you think people are going to be paying that much in fees just to post a freaking JPEG? Like, and if they are, like, more power to them.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
yes,
Super fascinating. So Matt, as we're kind of winding down the show here, would just be curious to get your take on what are you most excited about in the Bitcoin mining space? What are you most looking forward to in the coming year to 5 years? And I'd love to just hear your thoughts on what you think is coming.
I'd be lying if I said anything besides firmware right now. Like I'm so geeked out. We're going public tomorrow, man. Like it's going to be exciting. I'm sure my phone is going to blow up. My email, our tickets are going to blow up. But I'm ready for it. I'm excited to kind of shepherd this into the market a little bit and see how many hands we can get this in because. I'll shout out another podcast. Marty had the guys from Cathedra on Tales from the Crypt a couple weeks ago. Um, Everything they were saying is exactly what miners should be thinking about. Like, if you're not taking advantage of third party firmware in the coming months and at the point of the halving, there's a really chance you get wrecked. Like, just your OPEX will grow. So it's not like your OPEX will grow, but like your revenue stops growing, is not growing. So, yeah, it's too much of an opportunity to look over it too quickly. I think it would be you'd be remiss as a miner to look past firmware anytime soon.
It's a phenomenal way. I don't blame you for being so excited, because I mean, what an exciting thing to be able to add third party firmware that will help you weather this event. Because for people who haven't been through a halving with a Bitcoin mining operation, it's a good way to find out real quick everything you're saying, which is your revenue will get cut in half, um, while your OPEX is going to stay static and or increase. So why not, instead of like having to raise a bunch of cash to increase your OPEX to weather that, it could be 6 months before your revenue starts to come back to life. Third party firmware. I
Yep,
mean, yeah, so I don't blame you. It's super exciting.
it's
And
another tool in the tool belt.
what an opportune time to launch it into the marketplace, get people plugged into this thing, get them rocking and rolling on it. Yeah, so that's awesome. Matt, I'd love to end by letting you have a handoff to our listeners. How can they get in touch with you, Luxor? Where would you want to point customers to get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, Luxor.tech is our website. We actually just renovated it, so I got to give a big shout out to our front end team. They do masterful work. They make beautiful interfaces for just about everything they do. It's a great resource to find. Our firmware documentation will be up there. You can find me on Twitter at TDR Tango Delta, whatever the mnemonic is for R underscore M Lousteau. It's the Daily Reveille. That's what I should really say. That was the school newspaper at LSU. I was an opinion columnist for a couple of years there, so I kept the Twitter handle.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. So TDR M Lousteau on Twitter, and you can find me on LinkedIn and other stuff. So yeah, anyone who wants to shout out, by all means, get in touch.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the conversation today. This was exciting. This was all relatively new for me. Again, new for the show, just talking about the software side of things. Loved the conversation and appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.